Letter 6. The Lover. She seizes him and kisses him, and with impudent face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. Proverbs 7:13-15. I, wisdom, dwell in prudence, and I possess knowledge and discretion. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. Proverbs 8:12-17. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a ring upon your arm, for love is strong as death. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a flame of the eternal. Song of Songs 8:6-7. Dear unknown friend, here the whole composition of the sixth card is translated from the visual language of the tarot into that of the poetry of Solomon. For there a dark-haired woman with an impudent face, clad in a red robe, seizes the shoulder of the young man, whilst another, with fair hair and dressed in a blue mantle, makes appeal to his heart with a chaste gesture of her left hand. At the same time, above, a winged infant archer, standing out against a white sphere emitting red, yellow, and blue flames, is about to let fly an arrow directed at the other shoulder of the young man. Does one not hear, in contemplating the sixth card of the tarot, a voice which says, I have found you, and another which says, those who seek me find me? Does one not recognize the voice of sensuality and the voice of the heart, and likewise the flashes of fire from above of which King Solomon speaks? The central theme of the sixth arcanum is therefore that of the practice of the vow of chastity, just as the fifth arcanum had poverty as its theme, and the fourth obedience. The sixth arcanum is at the same time the summary of the two preceding arcana, chastity being the fruit of obedience and poverty. It summarizes the three vows or methods of spiritual discipline, in contrasting them with the three trials or temptations opposed to these vows. The choice before which the young man of the sixth arcanum finds himself placed is of greater significance than that between vice and virtue. It is a matter here of choice between, on the one hand, the way of obedience, poverty, and chastity, and on the other hand, the way of power, richness, and debauchery. The practical teaching of the arcanum, the lover, has to do with the three vows and the three corresponding temptations. For this is the practical doctrine of the hexagram, or sexternary. The three vows are, in essence, memories of paradise, where man was united with God, obedience, where he possessed everything at once, poverty, and where his companion was at one and the same time his wife, his friend, his sister, and his mother, chastity. For the real presence of God necessarily entails the action of prostrating oneself in the face of him who is more me than I myself am. And here lies the root and source of the vow of obedience. The vision of the forces, substances, and essences of the world in the guise of the garden of divine symbols, the Garden of Eden, signifies the possession of everything without choosing, without laying hold of, or without appropriating any particular thing isolated from the whole. And here lies the root and source of the vow of poverty. Lastly, total communion between the two, between one and another, which comprises the entire range of all possible relationships of spirit, soul, and body between two polarized beings, necessarily constitutes the absolute wholeness of spiritual, psychic, and physical being in love. And here lies the root and source of the vow of chastity. One is chaste only when one loves with the totality of one's being. Chastity is not wholeness of being in indifference, but rather in the love which is strong as death and whose flashes are flashes of fire, the flame of the eternal. It is living unity. It is three, spirit, soul, and body, which are one, and the other three, spirit, soul, and body, which are one, and 3 and 3 make 6, and 6 is 2, and 2 is 1. This is the formula of chastity in love. It is the formula of Adam-Eve, and it is this which is the principle of chastity, the living memory of paradise. And the celibacy of monks and nuns? How does the formula of chastity Adam-Eve apply here? Love is strong as death, i.e., death does not destroy it. Death can neither let one forget, nor let one cease to hope. Those of us, we human souls of today, who bear within ourselves the flame of the memory of Eden, cannot forget it, nor can we cease to hope for it. And if human souls come into the world with the imprint of this memory, and also with the impression of knowing that the meeting with the other will not take place for them in this life here below, they will then live this life as if widowed, insofar as they remember, and as if engaged insofar as they hope. Now all true monks are widowers and fiancés, and all true nuns are widows and fiancés, in the depths of their hearts. The true celibate bears witness to the eternity of love, just as the miracle of true marriage bears witness to its reality. Yes, dear unknown friend, life is profound, and its profundity is like an abyss of fathomless depth. Nietzsche felt this and knew how to express it in his Song of the Night, Nachtlied, from Thus Spake Zarathustra, Part 3, Chapter 15. O man, take heed. What saith deep midnight indeed? I lay asleep. I waked from my deep dream. The world is deep, and deeper than ever day may deem. Deep is its woe, joy deeper yet than woe is she. Saith woe, hence go, yet joy would have eternity, profound, profound eternity. Thus it is the same arrow, the arrow of fire, of the flame of the eternal, which brings about true celibacy as well as true marriage. The heart of the monk is pierced, and this is why he is a monk, just as is the heart of the fiancé on the eve of the wedding. Where is more truth or more beauty to be found? Who can say? And charity, the love of one's neighbour, what is its relationship with the love whose prototype is given by the formula Adam-Eve? We are surrounded by innumerable living and conscious beings, visible and invisible. But rather than knowing that they really exist, and that they are as much alive as we ourselves, it nevertheless appears to us that they have a less real existence, and that they are less living than we ourselves. For us it is we who experience the full measure of the intensity of reality, whilst other beings seem, in comparison with ourselves, to be less real. Their existence seems to be more of the nature of a shadow than full reality. Our thoughts tell us that this is an illusion, that beings around us are as real as we ourselves are, and that they live just as intensely as we do. Yet fine as it is to say these things, all the same we feel ourselves at the centre of reality, and we feel other beings to be removed from this centre. That one qualifies this illusion as egocentricity or egoism, or ahamkara, the illusion of self, or the effect of the primordial fall, does not matter. It does not alter the fact that we feel ourselves to be more real than others. Now, to feel something as real in the measure of its full reality is to love. It is love which awakens us to the reality of ourselves, to the reality of others, to the reality of the world, and to the reality of God. Insofar as we love ourselves, we feel real, and we do not love, or we do not love as much as ourselves, other beings who seem to us to be less real. Now, two quite different methods exist which can free us from the illusion me living, you shadow, and we have a choice. The one is to extinguish love of oneself and to become a shadow amongst shadows. This is the equality of indifference. India offers us this method of liberation from ahamkara, the illusion of self. This illusion is destroyed by extending the indifference that one has for other beings to oneself. Here one reduces oneself to the state of a shadow equal to the other surrounding shadows. Maya, the great illusion, is to believe that individual beings, me and you, should be nothing more than shadows, appearances without reality. The formula for realizing this is therefore me shadow, you shadow. The other way or method is that of extending the love that one has for oneself to other beings in order to arrive at the realization of the formula me living, you living. Here it is a matter of rendering other beings as real as oneself, i.e. of loving them as oneself. To be able to attain this, one has first to love one's neighbour as oneself. For love is not an abstract program, but rather it is substance and intensity. It is necessary, therefore, that one radiates the substance and intensity of love with regard to one individual being in order that one can begin to ray it out in all directions. To be able to make gold, one has to have gold, say the alchemists. The spiritual counterpart of this maxim is that in order to be able to love, everyone has to love or to have loved someone. This someone is one's neighbour. Who is one's neighbour, understood in the Hermetic sense, i.e. meaning at one and the same time in a mystical, gnostic, magical and metaphysical sense? It is the being nearest to one at or since the beginning. This is the sister soul for all eternity. This is one's twin soul, the soul together with whom one beheld the dawn of mankind. The dawn of mankind. It is this which the Bible describes as paradise. Now, this was at the stage of existence that God said, "It is not good that Adam should be alone." Genesis 2:18. To be, this is to love. To be alone, this is to love oneself. Now, it is not good, Tov, that Adam should be alone, means to say, it is not good that man loves nobody but himself. This is why YHVH Elohim said, "I will make him a helper similar or corresponding to him." And as Eve was part of Adam himself, he loved her as himself. Eve was therefore the neighbour, the being nearest to Adam, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Genesis 2:23. This is the origin of love, and it is common both to love which unites man and woman and to love of one's neighbour. In the beginning there was only one love, and its source was one, since its principle was one. All forms of love, charity, friendship, paternal love, maternal love, filial love, and brotherly love, derive from the same unique primordial root of the fact of the couple Adam-Eve. For it is then that love, the reality of the other, issued forth and could subsequently branch out and diversify. It is the warmth of love of the first couple, and it does not matter if there was only one couple or if there were thousands of them. It is a question of the fact of the first qualitative issuing forth of love, and not of the number of simultaneous or successive cases of this issuing forth, which is reflected in the love of parents for their children, reflected in turn in the love of children for their parents, reflected again in the love of children amongst themselves, reflected lastly in the love for all kinship of human beings and beyond immediate kinship, by analogy, for all that lives and breathes. Love, once born as substance and intensity, tends to spread, ramify and diversify according to the forms of human relationships into which it enters. It is a cascading current which tends to fill and inundate all. This is why, when there is true love between parents, the children love their parents by analogy and love each other. They love by analogy as their brothers and sisters by psychological adoption, their friends in school and in the neighbourhood. They love, always by analogy, their teachers, tutors, priests, etc., through reflection of the love that they have for their parents, and later they love their husbands and wives as their parents once loved one another. All this is clearly the inverse of Sigmund Freud's pansexual doctrine. For Freud, it is libido or sexual desire which is the basis of all human psychological activity, which constitutes the motivating energy thereof, and which then becomes, through the process of sublimation or direction through channels other than the satisfaction of sexual desire, creative force, socially, artistically, in science and religion. However, the whole of love, understood in the sense of the formula Adam-Eve, is the sexual desire as white light containing the 7 colours is to the colour red. Adam-Eve love includes the whole range of undifferentiated colours, whilst Freud's libido is only a single colour, isolated and separated from the whole. And this separation from the whole, and the whole is the principle of chastity, is exactly the inverse of chastity. It is the very principle of unchastity. For unchastity is nothing other than the autonomy of carnal desire, so that the wholeness of the human being, in spirit, soul and body, is ruined. Sexual desire is only one aspect of love, the aspect reflected by that part of the physical and psychic organism which is the special domain of the 4-petaled lotus, and it constitutes only 1/7 of the human psychic physical organism. There are therefore 6 more aspects, whose significance is in no way less, and which Freud's doctrine ignores, or even denies their existence. Just as Karl Marx, being impressed by the partial truth, reduced to its simplest basis, that it is first necessary to eat in order to be able to think, raised the economic interest to the principle of man and the history of civilization, so Sigmund Freud, being impressed by the partial truth that it is first necessary to be born in order to be able to eat and to think, and that sexual desire is necessary for birth, raised this latter to the principle of man and the whole of human culture. As Marx saw Homo economicus, economic man, at the basis of Homo sapiens, so Freud saw Homo sexualis, sexual man, at the basis of Homo sapiens. Alfred Adler could not follow his master in the attribution of absolute primacy to sex, his experience on many occasions contradicting this doctrine. Thus, this founder of another school of depth psychology was led to the discovery that it is the will to power which plays the leading role at the foundation of the human being. Adler then advanced the doctrine of Homo potestatis, man motivated by the will to power, instead of the Homo sapiens of 18th century science, the Homo economicus of Marx, and the Homo sexualis of Freud. However, Carl Gustav Jung, whilst admitting the partial truth of the doctrines of Freud and Adler, was led by his clinical experience to the discovery of a much deeper layer of the psyche than that studied by Freud and Adler. He had to admit the reality of a religious layer, which lies at a much greater depth than the layers of sex and of the will to power. Thus, thanks to the work of Jung, man is fundamentally homo religiosus, a religious being, though he may also be an economic entity, a sexual entity, and an entity aspiring to power. Now, Carl Gustav Jung re-established the principle of chastity in the domain of psychology, the other psychological schools mentioned being contrary to chastity, since they break down the unity of the spiritual, psychic, and physical elements of the human being. He discovered the divine breath at the core of the human being. At the same time, the work of Jung constitutes the inauguration of a new method in the domain of psychology. It is the method of exploration of psychic layers in succession, corresponding to the layers of archaeology, paleontology, and geology. And just as archaeology, paleontology, and geology regard the layers with which they have to do as archives of the past, as time becomes space, so does the depth psychology of the school of Jung treat psychic layers as the living past of the soul, which is as distant as the layer in question is deep. The measure of depth here is at the same time that of the history of the soul's past, going back beyond the threshold of birth. One can well discuss whether the layers are collective or individual, whether their continuance is due to heredity or reincarnation, but one can no longer deny the reality of these layers or their value as a key to the psychic history of man and mankind. More than that, one can no longer deny the fact that in the psychic realm nothing dies, and that the whole past lives present in the diverse layers of the depths of consciousness, the unconscious or subconsciousness of the soul. Paleontological and geological layers contain only the imprints and fossils of the now dead past. Psychic layers, in contrast, constitute a living witness to the actual past. They are the past which continues to live. They are memory, not intellectual, but psychically substantial, of the actual past. For this reason, nothing perishes and nothing is lost in the domain of the psyche. Essential history, i.e. real joy and suffering, real religions and revelations of the past, continue to live in us, and it is in we ourselves that the key to the essential history of mankind is to be found. Now, it is in we ourselves that there is to be found the Edenic layer, or that of paradise and the fall, of which an account is found in the book of Genesis of Moses. Do you doubt the essential truth of this account? Descend into the depths of your own soul, descend as far as the roots, to the sources of feeling, will, and intelligence, and you will know. You will know, i.e. you will have certainty that the biblical narrative is true in the most profound and authentic sense of the word, in the sense that you must deny yourself, deny the witness of the inner structure of your own soul, in order to be able to doubt the intrinsic truth of Moses' account. The descent into the depths of your own soul in meditating upon the account of paradise in Genesis will render you incapable of doubt. Such is the nature of the certainty that one can have here. But, of course, it is not a matter of certainty with regard to the garden, its trees, the serpent, the apple or other forbidden fruit, but rather with regard to the vital psychic and spiritual realities that these images or symbols reveal. It is not the symbolic language of the account which gives certainty of its truth, but rather what it expresses. It expresses in symbolic language the first layer, first in the sense of the root of all that is human in human nature, of human psychic life, or its beginning. Now, knowledge of the beginning, initium in Latin, is the essence of initiation. Initiation is the conscious experience of the initial microcosmic state. This is the Hermetic initiation, and of the initial macrocosmic state. This is the Pythagorean initiation. The first is a conscious descent into the depths of the human being, to the initial layer. Its method is ecstasy, i.e. experience of the depths at the foundation within oneself. Here one becomes more and more profound until one awakens within oneself to the primordial layer, or the image and likeness of God, which is the aim of ecstasy. It is above all by means of the sense of spiritual touch that this experience of ecstasy is effected. One can compare it to a chemical experiment undergone on the psychic and spiritual plane. The second initiation experience, that we have designated Pythagorean from a historical point of view, is based above all on the auditory sense or sense of spiritual hearing. It is essentially musical, just as the first is substantial or alchemical. It is by ecstasy, or rapture, or going out of oneself, that the macrocosmic layers, spheres or heavens, reveal themselves to consciousness. Pythagoras' music of the spheres was this experience, and it is this which was the source of the Pythagorean doctrine concerning the musical and mathematical structure of the macrocosm. For sounds, numbers and geometrical forms were the three stages of representing and mentally visualizing the ineffable experience of the music of the spheres. It is only from a historical point of view that we have designated as Pythagorean the macrocosmic initiation by means of ecstasy, for it is in no way a prerogative of the epoch prior to Christianity. The following is what the Apostle Paul says of his own experience of the spheres or heavens in ecstasy. Quote, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was carried up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man was raised up into paradise. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And he heard ineffable words, which man is not allowed to express. 2 Corinthians 12:2-4. St. Paul was therefore carried up to the third heaven or the third macrocosmic sphere, and he was then raised up into paradise, where he heard ineffable words. His macrocosmic initiation through ecstasy therefore took place in the sphere of paradise, the conscious experience of which, he heard ineffable words, is its aim, just as it is also the aim of initiation through ecstasy, which latter is characterized by experience of the primordial layer at the root of the human being or microcosm. The macrocosmic sphere of paradise and the microcosmic layer of Eden are the initia, the beginnings, to which one is initiated in the macrocosmic initiation as well as in the microcosmic initiation. Ecstasy to the heights beyond oneself and ecstasy into the depths within oneself lead to knowledge of the same fundamental truth. Christian esotericism unites these two methods of initiation. The Master has two groups of disciples, disciples of the day and disciples of the night, the first being disciples of the way of ecstasy, and the latter those of the way of ecstasy. He also has a third group of disciples of day and night, i.e. who possess the keys to both doors at once, to the door of ecstasy and that of ecstasy. Thus the Apostle John, author of the Gospel of the Word made flesh, was at the same time he who listened to the heart of the Master. He had the twofold experience, macrocosmic and microcosmic, of the cosmic Word and the Sacred Heart, of which the litany says, Heart of Jesus, King and centre of all hearts. It is thanks to this twofold experience that the gospel which he wrote is at the same time so cosmic and so humanly intimate, of such heights and depths simultaneously. There the macrocosmic solar sphere and the microcosmic solar sphere are united, which explains the singular magic of this gospel. For the reality of paradise is the unity of the macrocosmic solar sphere and the microcosmic solar sphere, the sphere of the cosmic heart and the solar foundation of the human heart. Christian initiation is the conscious experience of the heart of the world and the solar nature of man. God-man is the initiator, and there is no other. What we understand by the term initiator is what the early Christians understood by the word Kyrios, or Dominus, or Lord. With this, Christian esotericism or Hermeticism is in full accord with absolute sincerity today as in the past, when the words of the Creed are recited in church. We believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally begotten of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our salvation he came down from heaven. By the power of the Holy Spirit he became incarnate from the Virgin Mary and was made man. We bow with respect and gratitude before all the great human souls of the past and present, the sages, the righteous, the prophets, the saints of all continents and all epochs throughout the whole of human history, and we are ready to learn from them all that they wish and are able to teach, but we have only one sole initiator or Lord. We are obliged to reiterate this for the sake of certainty. But let us return to the theme of paradise. Paradise is therefore at one and the same time the fundamental layer of our soul and the cosmic sphere. One finds it just as well through ecstasy as well as by ecstasy. It is the realm of beginning and therefore of principles. Above we came across the principle of the three vows, obedience, poverty and chastity. Paradise, being the realm of beginning and principles, is at the same time that of the beginning of the fall or the principle of temptation, i.e. the principle of transition from obedience to disobedience, from poverty to greed, and from chastity to unchastity. The temptation in paradise was threefold, just as was the temptation of Jesus Christ in the wilderness. The following are the essential elements of the triple temptation in paradise, as it is described in the account of the fall in the book of Genesis. 1. Eve listened to the voice of the serpent. 2. She saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes. Genesis 3:6. 3. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Genesis 3:6. The voice of the serpent is that of the living being or animal whose intelligence is most advanced, the most artful, amongst all living beings, animals, whose consciousness is turned towards the horizontal, or animals of the fields. Now the intelligence of Adam and Eve was, before the fall, vertical. Their eyes had not yet been opened, and they were both naked and were not ashamed. Genesis 2:25. i.e. they were conscious of everything vertically, from above to below, or in other words, in God, through God and for God. They were not conscious of naked things, i.e. things separated from God. The formula expressing their perfection, their vision of things was, that which is above is as that which is below, and that which is below is as that which is above. Tabula Smaragdina 2. Thus, although they were both naked, they were not ashamed, because they saw divine ideality expressing itself through phenomenal reality. It was vertical consciousness, simultaneous knowledge of the ideal and the real, whose principles are found formulated in the Emerald Table. The formula of horizontal consciousness of the serpent, Nahash, would be that of realism, pure and simple. That which is in me is as that which is outside of me, and that which is outside of me is as that which is in me. This is horizontal consciousness, simultaneous knowledge of the subjective and the objective, which sees things not in God but separated from him or naked, within itself, through itself and for itself. And as the self here replaces God, horizontal consciousness being that of the opposition of subject and object, the serpent says that on the day when Adam and Eve eat fruit from the tree which is in the middle of the garden, their eyes will open and they will be as gods, i.e. the self will replace the function previously filled by God, and that they will know good and evil. If before they saw things in divine light, they will see them now in their own light, i.e. the function of illumination will belong to them, just as once it belonged to God. The source of the light will be transferred from God to man. This was the temptation that Eve heard in listening to the voice of the serpent. Its essence is the principle of power, which is autonomy of the light of consciousness. And Eve listened to the voice of the serpent. This voice was as audible to her as the other voice bearing from above the single commandment: "You may eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for on the day that you eat of it you shall die." Genesis 2:16-17. She therefore heard two voices, two inspirations arising from contrary sources. Here is the origin and the principle of doubt. Doubt is twofold inspiration. Faith is a single inspiration. Certainty is vanquished doubt. It is faith regained. Obedience, the principle of obedience, is devotion without reserve to the sole voice from above. Now, the very fact that Eve listened to another voice than that from above, that she compared the two voices, i.e. considered them as if they belonged to the same plane, and therefore she doubted, this very fact was an act of spiritual disobedience, and was the root cause and beginning of the fall. It was then that she looked at the tree and saw that it was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes. This was the second phase of the temptation and the second stage of the fall. For it was after having listened to the voice of the serpent that she looked at the tree. She looked at it in a new way, no longer as formerly when the soul voice from above vibrated in her being, when she experienced not the least attraction for the tree, but rather now with the word of the serpent vibrating in her being, with a questioning, comparing, doubting look, i.e. ready to have experience. Because when one is in doubt, one is induced to make experiments in order to dispel it, if one does not surmount it by raising oneself to a higher plane. It was in looking at the tree in this new way that it appeared to her good for food and a delight to the eyes. To be induced to seek experience is the beginning and the principle of greed, the principle opposed to poverty. It was after having looked at the tree in a new way that Eve stretched forth her hand, and she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Here is the third phase of the temptation and the third stage of the fall. It is to escape from doubt by plunging into experience and making the other take part. Here is the beginning and the principle of unchastity, contrary to the principle of chastity, because to seek experiences or to make experiments based on doubt is the very essence of carnal, psychic, and spiritual unchastity. For this reason, one does not carry out experiments in Christian esotericism or Hermeticism. One would never take recourse to experiments with a view to dispelling doubt. One has experiences, of course, but one does not make experiments, because it would be contrary to the holy vow of chastity to put forward a hand and to take from the tree of knowledge. The spiritual world does not in any way suffer experimenters. One seeks, one asks, one knocks at its door, but one does not open it by force. One waits for it to be opened.